Hello. In this video, we are going to spawn a lot of aliens in our Space Invaders game. So the version of the code that I have right now, we have some different menus. We have a menu started up and we started going with different scenes. So in this current version, I have in my game scene, just a player that shows up and then just one alien. So instead, I'd rather have lots and lots of aliens. So we're going to use a for loop. For loops are for repeating code. So if this code could give us one alien, then we just use a for loop to give us 40, 50, whatever number that we want. Now this code's going to get a little bit lengthy, so what I'm actually going to do is put this all in its own function. So I'm going to find a spot just where I can be not inside of any kind of a scene or anything. So down here, this is where my definition of the game scene finishes. So this is some good empty space that I can create a function in. So I am going to create a function here called spawn aliens. And then between these curly braces, that's where I can put that code. And then inside of the game scene, I'll just have to call that function. So I'm going to take this code that adds an alien. I'm going to cut that and just drop that right into my spawn aliens function there. And just tab this, the ending of the add function. So if I press play, you see how the alien doesn't show up. So let's remember that when you define a function and you want it to happen, you have to both define it, like actually write the code, but also call it. You have to tell the code when should this function happen. So I would like it to happen in the place where I was just copying and pasting from. So I'm going to call the function by name, spawn aliens, and then parens. Um, so now I'm back to where I started at least, but my code is going to get a little bit cleaner. So then I change this definition of what spawn aliens means. I want to use a for loop to spawn a whole bunch of them. So I'm going to set up a for loop. And in the meantime, let's just think that there's going to be like 50 aliens, something like that. So for parens let I equal 0, semicolon, I less than 50, semicolon, I plus plus. In parentheses, open some curly braces with the closing, and then I'll just drag this in to the for loop. Tab that over, grab all this, tab it over. All right, I got some empty space there. All right, so now I have a for loop here, and see what happens. So there are 50 aliens there, we just can't really see them. But that's because they are all in the same exact position. So this code did get repeated 50 times because of the for loop, but because I've repeated the fact that they stay in this position, it doesn't look like I have multiple aliens. But just taking a look at this for loop again, remember how this works. It starts off with the keyword for, and then you have the parentheses here, which tell you essentially how many times it's going to repeat. There's these other parts here that we're just not going to mess with too much. But when you say I less than 50, well, 50 is how many times this for loop is going to repeat. So this stuff inside those curly braces, the body, that's what repeats. So it's just going to add an alien. So what we want to do is make this position number here be a little bit different. Now, if I just did it random, I mean, they would show up at least, but I would like to organize them better into rows and columns. So it'd be nice if I could have a variable, if I want, for loops repeat my code, so I do have to write some code that will repeat. So if I want it to be a little bit different, that's exactly what variables are for, is for the code to function slightly differently, even though it's the same code. So before the for loop here, I'm going to make some variables. I'm going to say let x equal 0, let y equal 0. And then when it comes to adding the alien, I'm going to change the position to be x and y. Now, in the meantime, I'm just going to get this and still going to get 50 aliens all in the same place. But then if I can change these variables, then they'll start to space out a little bit. So inside the for loop here, I'm going to add some code. So after I've added an alien, but still before this closing curly brace, I'm going to say something like x plus equals, let's say 60. And then y plus equals 60 as well. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, so I'm now starting to see a few more aliens show up here. So we're getting a little bit closer. So notice how I created the variables before the for loop started. So, what is the code that I want to repeat and what's the code that I don't want to repeat? Well, saying that x is 0 and y is 0, I don't want that to repeat. I want that to only happen one time at the beginning. So I make sure to not put that inside my for loop. But then the stuff that I do want to repeat is saying that x should get bigger and bigger. Now, eventually I want an x that's like 360 or something like that. I didn't type the number 360 here. I had to write some code that was going to keep happening. So instead of saying that I wanted 360 and 480 or whatever, I wrote code that just said keep getting bigger. Get bigger by 60 every single time. And the for loop just takes care of that continuously happening. So I eventually get the numbers that I'm looking for. 480 or whatever. But it's because this code keeps happening. Now, instead of like a diagonal line, I would rather have them be in rows and columns. So we're going to do what I like to call the printer algorithm. Have you ever seen like a typewriter or a printer do its job? Then it moves over, and then when it gets to the end of the line, then it swings back around to print the next line. And when it gets to the end, it swings back around and prints the next line. And every time it does that, it goes lower. So we want to try to write some code that's kind of like that. So like an old style typewriter. Sometimes I want the X to change, and I think a lot of times. And then only sometimes I want the Y to change. Multiple times I want it to keep going down, but not all the time. That's the problem I have right now. And that's exactly what an if statement is for. So I do want the X to keep going down a lot and a lot, or the X to get bigger, because that typewriter that we're mimicking right now, or that old style printer, does move over and over and over. But the Y going down to the next spot, that is what I only sometimes want. So I'm going to make an if statement for that part. If, and I'll just say 3 greater than 2 for right now. Curly braces. Throw the Y plus equals 60 into there. Now I'm going to get the same result because 3 is always greater than 2. So think about what describes when should the Y go down. Well, it's if my alien printer got to the very end. So if X is big enough, if X is bigger than something, maybe it's like the 400 number. But in Kaboom, I can use the width function. It is a function in Kaboom. I can use the width function here to say that I've got to the end of the screen. So if that's the case, then that's when I want Y to increase. Okay, well, at least I'm not getting like a diagonal, but I definitely don't have 50 aliens. Because what I also need to do is, now that my alien printer got to the end, okay, it moved down, but I need it to go back to the beginning. So yeah, y is gonna plus equal 60, but now x needs to go back to 0. So notice how I'm saying x equals 0. The plus equals makes something increase, but the equals tells it to be that number. So now I get this shape. Yep, now I have my rows and columns of my aliens here.